the connection between the entities, everything will represented by the format of graphic format, especially on symbol format. That can be called as ER diagram. Inside one entity, if you have one more entity, then it can be called as recursive entity, or here it can be called as recursive relationship. All the entities which are solved under below, that will transfer to the result to the main one. That is, here it follows bottom up approach. Welcome back to one and all. Myself, Vasanta, lecturer in Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. Today, we want to start with the 6th session of database concept. Whereas in the previous class, you have studied regarding the codes rule as well as normalization. What do you mean by code rules? What are the rules, especially while creating the table? What are the rules we have to follow? Regarding that you have studied, as well as what do you mean by normalization, that is minimization, reducing the duplication, then which are the types under normalization that you have studied in the previous class, that is one normal form, second normal form, third normal form, as well as BCNF. Today you will study regarding entity relationship diagram. What do you mean by entity relationship diagram? Which are the symbols here we are using? Then what do you mean by generalization, specialization, aggregation, cardinality, as well as different types of keys? You will come to know on today's class. Now, one by one we'll discuss, that is entity relationship diagram. Entity relationship diagram is also called as ER diagram. Then what do you mean by this ER diagram? All the relation, all the attributes, all the connection between the entities, everything will represented by the format of graphic format, especially on symbol format. That can be called as ER diagram. Database design is done by creating entity relationship, that is ER models. These models are created using set of diagrammatic tools. Especially here we are using diagrammatic tools. Pictorial format will represent this. And ER diagram consists of entities, then relationship between that entities, then what are the entities in this and what are the attributes on this. Regarding that you will study. Whereas already in the previous class I told you what do you mean by entity, what do you mean by table, as well as what do you mean by database. When you come on attributes, here it is a collection of related characters we used to say. Then the collection of attributes can be called as record. And the collection of records can be called as table or relation. Whereas when they come on ER diagram, first we used to call it as entity. Entity is nothing but it is a real-time person or real-time work, real-time thing we used to call it as entity. That is, it may be an object or a place or a person. For example, if I am going to consider student is an entity. This entity we used to write in the square box, or we used to call this rectangle box. Both we can use to represent any entity. Then attributes. Attributes are represented by using this oval shape here. It describes the properties in this whatever entity we have. For example, for student, we have several properties like student ID. This is the properties. Then student name, marks 1, marks 2, then address, age, then qualification. These are the attributes are represented by using oval shape, and here these are the characteristics we used to call. And here what are the relationship between the entities, that can be called it as by using relationship between entity. By using rhombus symbol we can able to represent. Consider this is a student entity and one more entity will take, that is for example faculty. Consider this is one more entity. Here we have faculty. Here also we have attributes: faculty name, faculty ID, qualification, address, salary, date of birth. Consider like this, we have several attributes. This is one entity, that is faculty is one entity and student is one entity. And this faculty also having attribute, this student also having attribute. Then what exactly the relationship between student and faculty? The faculty used to teach. The faculty used to teach the student. This is the relationship. The relationship are represented by using rhombus symbol. It means that every database can be represented in the format of ER diagram, that is entity relationship diagram. For example, already I told you entity we used to write in a rectangle box and the oval shapes are used to represent the attribute and the relations are represented by rhombus shape. And here if it is the primary key, consider a student ID is the primary key. Is it? No, because it's a unique value that will never repeat for anyone. It's a unique value. Always the primary keys are identified by using one more line inside that oval shape. By that I can identify this is the primary key. For example, if I want to consider faculty, their faculty ID is the primary key. That is a unique value in the table. Like this, whatever data we have, everything we can able to represent in pictorial format, that is especially in diagrammatical format. That is, it consists of entities, these are the entities, and the relationship between the entities and the attributes on that entity, everything you can able to study on this ER diagram. Now, one by one we will discuss about the relationship. Then I told you, faculty teach the students. Here we have teaching is the dimension. That rhombus symbol represents the relationship. Here there are three types of relationship that exist between any two entities or any three entities. Between entities, the relationships can be represented. When we come on relationship, there are several types. Under that, the first one is binary relationship, recursive relationship, as well as ternary relationship. There are three types of relationships: binary, recursive, as well as ternary. Whereas in binary, the relationship occurs between two entities. The relationship occurs between two entities, then it can be called as binary relation. For example, here I told you faculty and one more is student. Then here the relation is here faculty teach the student. Okay. Then here binary relationship, the relationship occurs between two entities, then it can be called as binary relation. Then what do you mean by recursive relation? The recursive relation, entities are related with itself. Recursive means inside one entity, if you have one more entity, then it can be called as recursive entity, or here it can be called as recursive relationship. Inside one entity, if you have one more entity, itself once again it will process, then it can be called as recursive relationship. And ternary means more than two entities if you have. Consider this is one entity, this is one entity. If you have two entities, then binary relation. Inside one entity, if you have one more entity, then it can be called as recursive. Then ternary means more than two entities if you have, then it can be called it as the relationship occurs between more than two entities, then it can be called as ternary relationship. These are the three types of relationships, that is binary, relationship occurs between two entities, recursive, inside one entity if you have one more entity, recursive. Then ternary means more than two entities, on that time the relation will occur, then it can be called as ternary relation. Next, we will discuss about one by one binary relation. Already I told you in binary we have two entities. Then what do you mean by one to one? These are the few types of relationship occurs between two entities. One is one to one, one to many, many to many. Then what do you mean by this one to one relationship? One entity is related to another one entity. Only one faculty teaches only one student, then it can be called as one-to-one relation. See, one entity is related to another entity. One entity related to another entity, then it can be called it as one-to-one binary relation. Then what do you mean by one-to-many? One-to-many means here only one faculty teaches multiple students, more than one student. See, one entity is associated with many more entities. Consider only one teacher teaches several students. Student 1, this is student 2, and this is student 3. Then here everything is connected here. Only one faculty teaching multiple students. Then it can be called it as one-to-many. Now, next we'll discuss about many-to-many. Many-to-many means the name itself suggesting more than one entity is associated with more than one entity. It means that multiple faculties, multiple students. Then it can be called as many-to-many. One-to-one means only one student and only one faculty. Then one-to-many means one faculty, multiple students. Whereas many-to-many means many students, many faculties. Then there may be a partial constraints. If you have only one line, then it can be called it as partial, that is partial participation. If you have double line, then it can be called as total participation. Now is it clear? These are the few types of binary relationship. Next, we'll discuss about recursive. Already I told you, recursive means repetition once again inside one entity. If you have one more entity, then it can be called as recursive. Entity related to itself. Once again itself, then it can be called as recursive relationship. And the third one is ternary means more than two entities are related, then it can be called as ternary. When they come on relation, three types. First one is binary, second one is recursive, third one is ternary. Whereas under binary, once again one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. Then recursive means inside one entity, if you have one more entity, once again recursive format, repetition format, then it can be recursive. Then ternary means more than two entities. Next, we will discuss about generalization. What do you mean by this generalization? Why we require this generalization? Generalization, in generalization, the number of entities are brought together into one generalized entity based on their similar characteristics. Generalization. Then what do you mean by this generalization? I am going to give one example. Consider we have two students, student 1 and student 2. They will ask the question with the student 1, what about your result? What happens to your result? Then student 1 will say, I am passed, that's all. Then it is generalization. Okay. For example, in the same way, the same person will ask the result of the second student. Then that student will use to say, I am passed in second PUC, subject 1 this is the marks, subject 2 this is the marks, subject 3 this is the marks, like that. Each and everything when they will go to explain, then it can be called as specialization. Generalization ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಜನರಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಹೇಳೋದು. Whereas in this example, ಜನರಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಪಾಸ್ ಆದೆ ಅಂತ ಮಾತ್ರ ಹೇಳೋದು, that is generalization. Then specialization, specially each and every subject, how much marks is scored, specifically used to say, then it can be called as specialization. General ಆಗಿ ಹೇಳೋದನ್ನ generalization ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. Then specifically each and everything briefly when you explain, then it can be called as specialization. Whereas in generalization, number of entities are brought together into one generalized entity based on their similar characteristics. In generalization, it follows bottom-up approach. Bottom-up approach. What do you mean by this bottom-up approach? All the entities which are solved under below, that will transfer to the result to the main one. That is here, it follows bottom-up approach. Here, birds, then pigeon, parrot, dove. Everything one by one we can see here, that is generalization. Then next we'll discuss about specialization. The specialization is opposite of generalization. It is just opposite of generalization. In specialization, a group of entities is divided into number of subgroup based on their characteristics. Whereas here it follows top-down approach. Whereas in the previous case, bottom-up approach, now it follows top-down approach. Especially which is the subject, how much marks is scored, everything individually, each and everything he used to say, that is specialization. Now is it clear? Whereas here person is a student, where person is a teacher. Like that, we can specially identify what exactly here it is performing. That is specialization. Next, aggregation. The aggregation is a process when relation between two entities is treated as single entity. Consider the same example. Here we have one relation and here we have one entity and here also we have one more entity. Here faculty, one entity, and here student is one entity. Student, whereas faculty teach the student. Here the relation between two entities is treated as aggregation. Aggregation is a process when relation between two entities is treated as single entity. Now it can be called as single entity. In the single entity we have two sub-entity. There also we have one more relation. This can be called as aggregation. Combining two entities with one relation is called as aggregation. Now is it clear? Next, we'll discuss about cardinality. What do you mean by this cardinality? Cardinality specify how many instance of an entity related to one instant of another entity. Cardinality specifies how many instance of an entity related to one instant of another entity is nothing but cardinality. In cardinality specifies the occurrence of a relationship. Cardinality describes the relationship as an entity, mandatory or optional. Whereas cardinality specifies the maximum number of relationship. How many relationships here we have, how it is repeating, everything here in the cardinality you will come to know. Next, we will discuss about different types of keys. It's very important because in the exam for 1 mark they may ask any number of keys, or what do you mean by primary key, what do you mean by candidate key, what do you mean by super key or foreign key or alternative key. Like that you may going to get the question. Consider one table. In this table name we are given as employee table. Consider this is a table. The relation is employee table. In this special attributes like employee ID, employee name, who is that employee ID, then employee name, then address, then license number, then passport number. Consider these are the attribute. Relationship, what is the entity? Employee is the entity and the attributes are employee ID, employee name, address, license number and passport number. These are the few attributes. In this table we have the values like 100, 101, 102. This is the employee ID, then name, their address, their license number as well as passport number. Consider these are the values in this table. Then already I told you primary key is a key or a unique value in the table. It's a unique value in the table. Then one by one we will discuss. First of all, what do you mean by candidate key? It is a collection of one or more attributes to identify that field in that record. Consider in this unique value, which are the unique value employee ID I am going to collect. Then license number, that will also never repeat. Then passport number, that also never repeat. It is a collection of or more than one attributes. It is a collection of more than one attribute. For example, there is a probability of repeating the name. There is a probability of repeating the address. Whereas employee ID, license number as well as passport number, that will never repeats for anyone. Is it no? Only one value. The collection of these type of values can be called as candidate key. It is a collection of or more than one attributes. Collection of more than one attributes to identify that particular record. By using all these three, I am going to identify this is the record. That can be called as candidate key. Then here we have primary key also. Then what do you mean by primary key? For example, I am to consider student information. On that, consider few values like student ID, student name, 3 subjects marks. Then there is a repetition of marks will be there. Name also there will be repeating. But when they come on the register number, that will never repeats. Is it no? Then on that time we are consider register number is the primary key. It's a unique value that will never repeat for anyone. That can be called as primary key. Primary key is a unique value. It's only one attribute we are going to consider. Whereas in candidate key we will take more than one attribute to identify the record. Whereas in primary key we are going to consider only one attribute, that must should be unique value. Then employee ID is the primary key. Employee ID, license number, passport, these two can be called as candidate key. Then what do you mean by alternative key? Alternative key, or we can say it as unique key also here. Then alternative key is nothing but except the primary key. Whatever thing in that table, that can be called it as alternative key. For example, if you don't have the register number, then which one you will take? You will take the name is the primary key. Consider if you have register number, then you will consider the register number is the primary key. When you don't have the register number, then you will consider the name is the alternative key. Here also, this license number as well as passport number, both I can take it as alternative key. Okay, now you studied candidate key, primary key, alternative key. Then what do you mean by this foreign key? Foreign key is a primary key for another table. Here we have the values, that is employee ID, license number, passport, whereas this employee ID is a primary key for another table. See, for example, in the next table we have salary table, their employee ID, salary, month, year, then amount, consider these are the attributes. In this, the foreign key is employee ID. Andre employee ID ಅನ್ನೋದು ಈ ಟೇಬಲ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ primary key ಆಗಿದೆ. Whereas in previous case, this is not only the primary key, it is a collection of values also. If the same attribute is present in this table and this same attribute will act as a primary key in another table, then it can be called as foreign key. Then you have one more, super key. Super key is a collection of primary key, candidate key, unique key, or I can say it as alternative key. Then it can be called as super key. Now is it clear? Only one thing. ಈಗ ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ ಡೇಟಾಬೇಸ್ ಅಂತ ತಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ ರಿಜಿಸ್ಟರ್ ನಂಬರ್ ಮಾತ್ರ ಇದ್ರೆ ದೆನ್ ಇಟ್ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಬಿ ಕಾಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ಪ್ರೈಮರಿ ಕೀ. Register number, student register number as well as college, whatever number they given, that is from the board, that number, the collection of that two, I can call it as alternative key or candidate key. Then only the board number which is given to the student, that can be called as alternative key. The collection of all these three can be called as super key. And the student ID, the same thing, information is present in one more table that acts as a primary key, then that can be called it as foreign key. Now is it clear? The same example, one more I am going to take here. Consider here I am having student information in one table and here I am having one more information, one more table. Here I am going to take it as college and here I am going to take it as student. Two tables here I am having, one is college and one more is student. In this college I am having student ID or college ID, then college name, student ID. Then in the student table I am having one more information, student ID, then name. Then on this case you can identify the student ID is one of the properties, one of the attributes in the college table, but this student ID acts as a primary key in another table, that can be called as foreign key. Andre ee table alli student ID attribute ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ, ಆದರೆ ಆ attribute ಬೇರೆ ಒಂದು table ಅಲ್ಲಿ primary key ಆಗಿ act ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ then it can be called as foreign key. Now is it clear? Next we'll discuss about once again candidate key when more than one or group of attributes serves as unique identifier in each table is called as candidate key. If you observe this here, more than one, that is employee ID, license number as well as passport, these three I can call it as candidate key. Then primary key is the field in the table which uniquely identify each row, each record in a database, that can be called as primary key. Whereas if you observe this here, this is the primary key. Okay. Next, alternative key. The alternative keys of any table are those candidate keys which are not currently selected as the primary key, that are the alternative key. If you observe here, then this passport number as well as if I want I can take license number also alternative key other than primary key. Next, we'll discuss about foreign key. Foreign key is nothing but its attribute in one table, but the same attribute acts like a primary key in another table. It's a key used to link two tables together is called foreign key. Then super key is a set of candidate key. It is the all set of columns for which no two rows share the same values for those sets. These are the few keys available in the database. Next class, we will meet with the remaining concept of the same chapter. Thank you for all of you.